Okay. I think you guys are gonna really like this video, okay? At least I hope so, okay? Okay, also my sister, I told her I wanted yassuck in this font on this cup, and she made this for me. She can make completely customizable cups. She's doing this thing too where she'll like draw a picture of your dog or cat and like put it on a cup for you with their name on it. I think that's really, really cool, but pretty much she can make any cup you could ever imagine. So if you are interested in that, the link is in the description, okay? You will not regret it. So anyways, what am I doing here talking to you guys? Today we're making a very highly requested video that you guys have been asking for a while. I am a self-proclaimed professional beginner, and that means that I wasn't in your shoes too long ago. Like 5 months ago, I was a complete beginner and had no idea what I was doing. So I can tell you guys exactly what I needed to know to get to where I am right now. So instead of having to force you guys to watch 10 separate videos to learn how to knit, I thought that I would just make it into one video and hopefully give you guys the ultimate guide to knitting for beginners. Oh, that's probably gonna be the title of this video. The ultimate guide for knitting for beginners. That sounds like a good title. I'm not an intermediate or advanced knitter, but like I know what I'm doing, okay? I am really good at the basics, like really good. So I'm excited to be able to show you guys the basics, and then we can all be professional beginners. All the other videos that I had watched, I'm gonna be honest, they just weren't doing it for me. I don't know if I'm just like dumb and I'm just not picking it up, but the videos were kind of confusing for me, so why not just make my own video so that maybe I can help one of you guys. After this video, I'm pretty much confident that you are going to have the confidence to be able to knit whatever you want, including this sweater. As soon as I figured out all of these things that I needed to learn, I was completely comfortable knitting this. This is the cardigan number 7 by My Favorite Things Knitwear. Highly recommend it. Really great pattern. I really enjoyed it, but it was really easy. All you're gonna maybe have to look up is how to increase, how to decrease, but that's easier than looking up how do I knit something. Okay, that's way too general. But since like 5 months ago I used to be in your shoes, I'm pretty confident that I can help you, you know, get to my level, which is like not that much higher than where you are right now, but it's like better, you know? Like I can tell people I know how to knit something, and I actually have like a knit sweater, and everyone's like super impressed, even though it's like really not that hard to learn how to knit. Because if I can do it, you can do it for sure, and you're probably gonna be better than me a lot faster than I was. Now let's get into some actual knitting information. So the first thing that you're gonna have to take into account when you start knitting is obviously your knitting needles. And before I even get into the 2 types of knitting needles, let me just tell you what I recommend. First off, just get the fattest knitting needles you can find and the fattest yarn, and go through this video knitting with that. That's gonna really help you out. These are the first knitting needles that I've ever used. This is a 9mm knitting needle, and I brought this yarn. This is burnout blanket yarn, and it's super thick, so I highly recommend that you just start knitting with the fattest yarn and the fattest needles that you can find. Because when you first start knitting, the most important thing that you're gonna wanna learn how to do is how to differentiate different stitches, like the knit stitch, the purl stitch, how to count rows, how to count columns. And when you have bigger, thicker yarn, it's really easy to count versus like if you have thinner yarn. And another thing, when you have thinner yarn, it takes a long time to knit something. But when you have really fat yarn, you can knit something like really fast, like in a day or 2. So I definitely recommend starting with thicker yarn and thicker needles. But now let's get into the 2 types of needles. We have straight needles and we have circular needles. So I will say that I'm only using circular needles as of right now, but I did start with straight needles. What I like about straight needles, actually I can't find the pair to these other 2 needles, and I actually really like this needle, so RIP to that other one. I'm gonna miss you. But okay, what I like about straight needles is that I think that they're great for starting out because they're really rigid. It's really easy to keep track of all of your stitches and just to see what's happening. On circular needles, you definitely have to get used to it being really flimsy and having your stitches just kind of like laying on here. So for beginners, that's why I really enjoyed starting with straight needles. What I don't like about straight needles is that you are really limited on space. So you won't ever really see straight needles that are like this long. And you know, my body, I like to, like, this is not the size of my body, you know what I mean? So when I was knitting a sweater on these, it was just getting really like confused. Not confusing, but it just wasn't comfortable knitting a sweater on these needles because I'm really limited on space. This is the first thing, one of the first things that I started knitting, and it's just really hard to tell if this can fit me or not. But on circular needles, because you have this like wire, it's a lot easier to like see if it's gonna fit you or not and be able to actually like see the size of what you're knitting. So for that reason, I am not a huge fan of circular needles for knitting things like sweaters. Also, when you have to knit things like in the round, which is when you're knitting like not a tube, but you're knitting in a circle continuously, like if you're making a balaclava, the neck part would need circular needles. It's just a lot easier because circular needles, they're the best. So starting out, when you're going through this video, I would recommend you starting with fat straight needles, just so you can learn the knit stitch, you can learn the purl stitch, you can learn all the basics that you need. But once you do start doing projects like sweaters, balaclavas, and all that, I would recommend switching to circular needles. But if you're just gonna be making like squares and scarves, straight needles are perfect for that, I will say that. If you take anything from this introduction, fatter yarn, fatter needles, great for beginners. So now we are going to officially start with the first thing that all knitters need to know, and that's casting on. And casting on is just pretty much getting stitches onto your needle, which is how you make things with knitting. You have to cast on a certain amount if you want to make a sweater or a scarf, and this is how you can do it. And before you cast on, you have to slip knot. So the cast on method that I'm going to be showing you is the long tail cast on, and I'll get into that in like a minute tops. But something that you need to know is before you do slip knot, you want to leave a generous tail. So just estimate how much you think you would need. So if you need about 15 stitches on your needle, which is just about what I'm probably going to put on, then you probably just need like, this should be good. This is pretty generous, and you'd rather have more than less. It's just annoying to run out. So now we are going to start casting on. So first what I do is I put my yarn in my hand like this, just open palm, and you'll see that this leads to the tail that I just made, and this part leads to the ball of yarn, which is invisible on the other side of the screen, but I promise you it exists. And then using 2 fingers, what I'll do is I will just wrap it around my fingers and make an X. And then using my needle, I will go under the first loop, grab the second loop, and pull up, and then tighten. And that is how you slip knot onto your needle. I'll do that one more time with you guys. So you'll have the yarn in your hands like this. You'll grab it with these 2 fingers, and then you will wrap it around these 2, making an X. And then using your needle, you will go under the first loop, grab that second loop, and pull up, and then tighten. And that's how you slip knot. That's the first step to knitting something. And if you can do that, then it's looking good, okay? You're gonna be able to knit, I promise. That's the one thing I can guarantee you today. Now we're going to start casting on. So what you'll notice is when you do your slip knot, there are 2 strings coming down, and there's one that's facing you and there's one that's away from you. So what you want is you want that the yarn that's facing you to be connected to that tail that we left. And that's not the case right now. Here's the tail that I made, and if we look at which one's closest to me, we can see that this yarn is the closest one to me, and this one is connected to the ball of yarn over here. So we're going to change that, and it's really easy. All you do is you take this off of your hook, you turn it, or off of your needle. Sorry, I'm still speaking in crochet terms. It's going to happen a lot more. I apologize. And then you will just slip that back on, and now the string that is closest to you is connected to the tail that we left. And now we are officially going to cast on. So we are going to be doing the long tail cast on method. I believe that this is the most popular way to cast on. This is the cast on method that I have used for all of my projects this far. Yes, including the beautiful sweater that I was wearing at the beginning of this video. And I've seen a lot of professionals using it. In my opinion, it's the easiest cast on that I've seen so far. It's great for beginners, and it's just awesome that I see a lot of people who are professionals using this cast on method, so I trust it. It's the only cast on method that I'm gonna show you guys because I'm not trying to confuse you. I just want to give you guys the best things you need to start knitting right now. So here is how you do it. So we have the 2 strings that are coming from the slip knot. What you're gonna do is using your hand, you're gonna come behind it and you're gonna grab it with these 3 fingers, okay? And at the same time, this hand on top, you're gonna keep your finger on this loop because if not, it's gonna slide on really easily and that gets kind of annoying. So using these 2 fingers, you are going to open up these 2 strings, just like that. So again, this is connected to the tail that we have, and this back one that's on our index finger is, this piece of yarn is connected to the ball of yarn over there, over yonder. So now that we have this, you're going to go lower and you're going to stick your hook into the loop around your thumb. And then you are going to grab onto the yarn that's around your index finger. And you're going to come back through the loop on your thumb and you're going to let go and pull down. And congratulations, you have just made your first cast on. So now we have 2 stitches on our needle. Let's do that again. So I'm gonna start from the complete beginning, okay? So we have our yarn. This one is the tail and this one is connected to the ball of yarn. Using our hand, you're just gonna grab onto it with these 3 fingers. And we have total control with our index and our thumb. And our index finger on our right hand is holding on to these loops. Also, feel free to not do your stitches too tight, especially as a beginner. It can get really annoying and really frustrating when you do your cast-ons super duper tight. So just feel free to keep them loose, have some wiggle room. They should slide pretty easily. So back to the cast-on. So you're holding on to this. You have your index and your thumb, and you're just going to put them in between, just like that. This is how it's holding in my hand. And then you are going to, holding on to this or else it'll slide off, you're going to bring these needles down. Just like this, so that we have 1 loop around our thumb and 1 loop around our index finger. So now we are going to go with our needle and go into the loop that is around our thumb. And then we are going to grab on to the yarn that's around our index finger. And we're going to go pull back through the thumb loop, and then you can just let go of the thumb loop and pull down. Okay, just like that. So let's do that again. So once your thumb is out, you can just put your thumb right back in, open it and bring it down. So into the thumb loop, grab onto the index, out the thumb loop, let go of the thumb loop, pull down. And I like doing it, I like pulling it down with my thumb because then I'm right back into the formation of before. So we pulled that down. You're gonna put your thumb back inside of this like little hole we've made, this little cavern. And you're gonna go into the thumb loop, grab onto the index finger's loop, out the thumb loop. Here, sorry, let me do it a little bit slower. So you're gonna go into the thumb loop, grab on to the index finger's loop, come right back out the thumb loop, let go of your thumb, and then you can use your thumb to pull it back down, and then we are right back in formation. We have done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches. I think I'm gonna do 15 like I said before. So now that I've explained it, I'm just gonna show you guys how I do it like at a normal pace. So I grab onto this, I open this, I bring it down, I have my finger here, and I just going through the thumb, index, thumb again, tighten, thumb, index, thumb again, like that. So now that you have stitches on your hook, let's start to make it look pretty by learning what a knit stitch is and what a purl stitch is. So we are going to start with the knit stitch. Now the knit stitch is actually my favorite stitch. I think it's the most fun and like the most natural to do. And And just to preface this, I am going to go more into details about this, but the knit stitch and the purl stitch are really similar in that they're the opposite of each other. So that doesn't make much sense right now, I know. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you what a knit stitch is, and then I'll go into details about what I just said. So this is how you do your basic knit stitch, okay? So this piece of yarn right here is connected to the ball of yarn that it's invisible, that's over yonder. Here is how I hold my yarn to knit. I hold my yarn the same exact way that I hold it for crocheting. So if you're a crocheter, go ahead, but if you're new to everything, I will show you how I hold my yarn. So first what I do, so the first thing that I do is using my palm, this is the yarn that is connected to the ball of yarn. I will put it over my pinky, just like this. So if this is my hand and this is my ball of yarn, I will just put it over my pinky like that. And then what I'll do is I will turn my hand over. So it's still hooked on my pinky and it's become a loop. And then I will put my index finger under this yarn. And that's how I hold my yarn. So I'll do that one more time. So if you have your hand like this, which is kind of how I start everything, I just taking the yarn that's connected to the ball, I'm going to put it over my pinky, and then I'm going to turn my hand so that it's facing me, and then I'm just going to put my index finger under there, and that is how I hold my yarn. It might not be the most ergonomic way to hold my yarn, but hey, it works, and I'm learning other ways, but I'm not there yet. So now the knit stitch. So here is how you do the knit stitch. So using our second needle, we have our needle with the stitches in our left hand, and in our right hand, we have the empty needle. You're gonna find your first stitch right here, and you're gonna put your needle, I wanna just get real close so you can see it real close, and you're just going to stick your needle in there. Hold on, let me wait for it to focus. Do you guys see that? It's under here, going all the way through. Okay, and then you're going to take this yarn and you're going to wrap it around the needle, and then you're going to bring it right back through, and then you're going to pull it off of the left needle. And you just did your first knit stitch. So that is the whole gist of the knit stitch. Essentially everything is through the back. So when you put your needle in, you're going to go from the front to the back so that your needles have this X. You're going to wrap the yarn around it like that, and then you're going to come back through the loop and pull it off. Let's do it again. So right here in this stitch, you're going to put your needle through it so that you have an X, wrap the yarn around it, and then you're going to come back down with that yarn and pull it off of the loop. So that is what a knit stitch is, and oops, okay. And something that I want to show you is it's kind of hard to see here, but when you finish a knit stitch, you can see like a V shape. You can see like a V shape right here, and that shows the knit stitch makes a V shape. And this is kind of important to see because when we make the purl stitch, you're going to see a different shape. So just try to keep that in mind. That's kind of what you want to learn at the beginning of your knitting journey, just how to differentiate between a knit stitch and a purl stitch when you're done knitting, because you know that's kind of important, and I'll show you why it's important later, but it is. And I'm just going to show you how I do the knit stitch. I kind of did this foundation chain a little bit too tight. Again, we're putting our needle through the back, grabbing the yarn, coming forward, and then taking that loop off the needle. Now you can see this is the knit stitch, and if you look really closely, I'll show you some more obvious examples in the future, or like in a few minutes. If you look really closely, you'll see that there's these little V's every single time we made the knit stitch. So I'm gonna go a little bit more into detail about the knit stitch in like a second, but now I wanna show you how to purl. So now let's do the purl stitch. So I changed to yellow or like Bitcoin colored yarn, just so you can tell the difference. So the blue is knit, and now we are going to purl. So purling is, I'll go into more detail about this, but it's pretty much the opposite of knitting. Or the purl stitch is the opposite of the knit stitch, and I'll show you why in a second. So I'm gonna hold my yarn the same way, except before we were holding the yarn like this, but now we will be holding the yarn in front like that. So you can put the yarn in front. This is our little tail, and then make sure that you're holding the yarn that's connected to the ball of yarn that is invisible. So that's one thing that's different from purling and from knitting, is that when you're purling, the yarn is in front. Now the second thing that's different is I have my empty needle here. You're going to stick your needle in the front, from the back through the front. So you're gonna have this X. So I'll do that one more time. So we have our first stitch here. Let me isolate it. And you're going to take your needle and you're going to go from the front and just go all the way through. Just like that. So with purling, your needle is going through the front. If we were knitting, it would have been like this. But no, we're purling, so it's like this. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna take your yarn and you're going to wrap it around like that. So you have the yarn in front, you just wrap it around like that. And then you're going to take that yarn and you're gonna pull it through this loop. And then you're gonna take that whole entire stitch off the needle. And you just purled for the first time. So now you want to make sure you're looking at where you're holding your yarn. Right now my yarn is in the back and we need it to be in front. So I'm going to move it in front and then I'm going to purl again. So I'm going to put my needle, you can see the stitches right here. You're going to put your needle through the stitch like that. You're going to yarn over and then you're going to pull it through over the top. So whenever I purl, this is kind of how it turns out after. So I have to remember to put my yarn back on this side so that I can purl again. So again, we're going to get our needle and we're going to point it in here. And then you're going to yarn over, pull back out, and take that stitch off the needle. Okay, so now let's pause and let's remember that when we were looking at the knit stitch, whenever you finished a knit stitch, you would see a V shape. And so now when we finish 3 purl stitches, there is no V shape, there's this little bump. So that's another thing that differentiates the purl stitch from the knit stitch. And I'll put them side to side right now. So you'll see here, when we finished knitting, we were given these V shapes. But here, when we finish knitting, or when we finish purling, sorry, we get a little bump like that. So I'm gonna kind of go normal pace-ish. I'm not even a fast purler, but I'm gonna go a little bit faster. Put the needle in the front like that, and then purl through the front loops and purl. Now I think it's more obvious that you guys can see that every single stitch, you have this bump at the top. And that's kind of why it's better to like knit with bigger yarn and bigger needles at the beginning, because this is going to be so much more obvious on your huge needles. And then I'm just going to put the purl stitch right next to it so you can see how different they look. So this is the knit. You see those V shapes, and this is the purl, and you see those bumps. And this pretty much makes up like most of knitting until you get into like more professional stitches, but I'm gonna be honest, I have not looked at any of those because like I said, I'm a professional beginner. So now I'm going to talk about how I mentioned before that knitting and purling are essentially the opposite thing. So here is where I knit and here is where I purl, and I'm just going to show you something that I think is going to explain everything you need to know. So let's turn these both around. Okay, does this look familiar to you? So when we turn the knit stitches around, they're literally purl stitches. I don't know why I said literally. This kind of blew my mind when I learned this. Okay, like this was probably the hardest part of knitting, taking this information in and knowing what to do with it. And then when you turn around purling, it's literally a knit stitch. So what that means is that when you are knitting, you have to keep in mind that on the back is purls. And when you're purling, you have to keep in mind that on the back is knitting. So this comes into play when you are learning the stockinette stitch. This information is really important to know when considering the stockinette stitch, just because this one means you have to keep track of which side you are knitting on. So this is the knit side. You can clearly see all of these V shapes up and down, and which side you are purling on. And as you can see, this is a whole wall of purling. So this is kind of like the most popular stitch. It's the one that everyone wants to learn. And I understand it because it's beautiful. But all that takes is understanding of a knit stitch and a purl stitch. So now that we know that they're the opposites of each other, let's learn about some different different squares that you can make from this. So the first square that you can make is the garter stitch. So the garter stitch, it looks like this, and it's essentially when you are knitting or purling back and forth continuously. So I'm going to show you guys on both of these what happens. So remember, this is our knitting, this was our knitting and this was our purling. And because they are the same thing, if you just continue to knit back and forth over and over and over again, which I will do with you here now just to show you, you know, just even how to knit back and forth in knitting or purling, they're essentially going to look exactly the same because they're the same thing but the opposite. Now, that might sound confusing, but let me just show you right now. So again, this is called the garter stitch. So we knit the first row, right? We finished knitting it, and this is how we ended. We ended here because we took all the stitches off from here. So then what you're going to do is you're going to change needles, and you are going to start again the same way you did before. So you have our yarn in the back because we are going to be knitting. And we're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to put our needle up and knit all the way across. All the way across. And as you can see, I am knitting on top of a purl stitch, on top of a purl row, right? So that's why the garter stitch essentially looks the same on whether you're knitting or purling, because you're doing the same thing. You're just knitting on top of a purl row, or you're purling on top of a knit row, vice versa. Okay, so we just finished this row. So now we're going to switch it here and knit the same way. And I just wanted to knit a few rows with you guys, but I'm actually going to finish about 5 or 6 rows just to show you guys what it's going to look like. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this purl just so you guys can see what it looks like when you purl over and over again, just like this. I just want to prove to you guys that the garter stitch is able to do in either case. So I'll be right back after finishing a few rows of knitting. So after, I think this is like 8 rows, and yeah, I know it's 8 whole rows, and it's absolutely tiny because of this tiny needles that I used. So that is why I keep saying it's better to use fatter needles, because then your project will go even faster as well. So just take it from me, you will not regret using fatter needles. So this is how it looks after just knitting back and forth 8 times, and this is the garter stitch. But now I just want to prove to you that purling will give you the same exact look. So I am going to purl. Let me move this yarn out of the way for now. So now I'm just going to continuously purl back and forth, and also just show you how to purl back and forth. So this is how he finished, because we moved all of the stitches to this side. So you're just going to switch needles, Make sure this yarn is in front. Push these stitches to the front. And now we are just going to purl like I taught you. So you're gonna use your needle, you're gonna go through the front, you're gonna yarn over and pull that in front. Stitch here. Again. So this is also if you just need like another clear way of seeing how I do it. So I've also noticed that when I am purling, it does tend to be a little bit looser than what I'm knitting. Of course, this won't always be true, but as a beginner, I just kind of noticed because purling is a little bit more like stretching the yarn, in my opinion. It just makes my stitches a little bit looser. So it's still gonna make the same garter stitch, you just might see that the stitches are looser. I don't know how many times I can say looser. I'm so sorry. So now we just purled, and as you can see, it already is starting to look like our other garter stitch. So now we're gonna switch needles again, turn this around, make sure the yarn is in front. Stick my needle in the front as you do when you're purling. And then just purl all the way across. Okay, so I'm going to continue purling for around the same rows just so I can show you guys what that's going to look like. And so I will be right back once I finish purling just so we can compare. So I just finished purling all the way back and forth, and as I said, they're exactly the same, frontwards and backwards. And so that is the garter stitch. Essentially, you can knit or purl back and forth a bunch of times, and you get this really, really beautiful stitch that is alternating between purling and between knitting. The stockinette stitch. So this is probably why you want to learn how to knit. It's the most beautiful stitch thus far that I know. I love it so much. So let's get into how you make it. Okay, so I have casted on about 20 stitches just to show you the same way, the long tail cast on method. So let's get started. So on this first row, we are going to just simply knit all the way across. And we know how to do that now. Oops. Do I know how to do that now? I don't know. The video did not prove me right. Okay, yeah, I do know how to knit. So we're just going to knit all the way to the other side. So I just finished knitting one side. So now we are going to go to the next row. But on this row, we are going to purl. So essentially, I will explain. When you see that there's purls, you have to purl on that side. And when you see that there's knit stitches, you have to knit on that side. And that's the whole idea of the stockinette stitch. But don't worry, I will do it with you just to prove it. So now that we see purls here, we know, okay, so we're gonna keep our yarn in front and we're gonna purl. We're gonna stick our yarn through the front and just purl all the way across. Okay, so I just finished purling on the purl side. So now we are going to flip it and we see knit stitches. So now we know that this row is knitting. And this is like a great way to like learn like how to see the stitches and like get familiar with a knit and a purl. And it's just crazy how fancy the stockinette stitch ends up looking when it's literally like so easy. And now that you know how to make it, you're about to be so fancy, like you're not even ready. So we have finished some rows on our stockinette stitch together. Here's the knit side and here's the purl side. Both sides are used like on the outside of garments. This one's probably the most popular, but this one's definitely still cute. But I'm gonna do a few more rows just to show you what it looks like in a bigger square. So I didn't want to do too many rows because I already kind of have this as an example, but here's how it looks after some consecutive rows of knitting on this side and purling on this side. Something that is annoying about the stockinette stitch is you can already see here is that it curls on the ends. So if I were to open it all the way, this is how far it actually goes, but it curls. But I mean, that's okay when it's like a sleeve or something. It's not like a huge deal. Also, you can block it, which is when you soak it in water. I don't know if it has to be warm or like have soap in it, and then you just anchor it down, and I think that that will help with the curling on the side. But honestly, it's really worth it for how beautiful this stitch is. But that's pretty much the stockinette stitch. Okay, you guys, so we are going to be learning one more stitch today, and this is the rib stitch. You may have heard of it. It's kind of similar to like this sleeve, as in like you'll see it at the bottom of sweaters, on the sleeves of sweaters, on the collars, and it's just a really helpful stitch to learn, and it's pretty simple, and you can make this in a bunch of different ways. So let's just start with the basics. So it is made up of knitting and purling, of course. Why wouldn't it be? Because this is the basics video, and everything that we're learning today is with knitting and purling. So the rib stitch is made up of a combination of knitting and purling, as in we are going to be changing between them. So this one will be, the first stitch will be a knit. This one will be a purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, and I'll show you like what comes with that, because you have to keep track of something while you are knitting in that way. So first you're going to start by knitting. So we're going to knit the first stitch. And then our next stitch is going to be a purl. So you're going to want to bring your yarn in front, and then you'll just purl. And then our next stitch is going to be a knit. So our yarn's already in the back, it's perfect. So then we'll just knit. And then our next stitch is going to be a purl. So we're just going to purl. And we're going to do this all the way to the end. We're going to knit stitch. Oops. We're going to purl stitch. The hardest part of this stitch, honestly, for me, is just keeping track, just because I get distracted so easily. It's so easy for me to mess up and to just like accidentally knit stitch twice next to each other. And that's a me problem, to be honest. This is a beautiful stitch. It's pretty simple, but of course, like I kind of have to complicate everything, as we do sometimes. It's okay. But that's pretty much like the hardest part of this, just kind of keeping track. And eventually it does kind of become unconscious, but that definitely takes practice, and I'm getting there, but I still mess up, okay, y'all? Like, I'm human. Okay, so then our last stitch right now is going to be a purl. So you kind of want to remember that. And let's just take a look at what I have knitted, and you can see that when there's a bump here, so that's a purl stitch, that's a knit stitch, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit. And if you kind of can't tell, you just gotta kind of pull it down and it becomes a lot clearer. Okay, so now how do we do the next row? So we flip it, and we finished on a purl stitch. So it's important to remember that, because when you flip it, it's the opposite. So if your last stitch was a purl stitch, then that means when you flip it, your first stitch, it has to be a knit stitch, because you want all the knits and all the purls to line up. So that was, our first was a knit. So then we know that our second is going to be a purl. And look, you can see that there's 2 purl stitches, one bump, 2 bump on top of each other. And then we know the next one is a knit. And yeah, you can see the 2 V shapes on top of each other. Purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. Okay, so now the last 2 stitches, this is going to be a knit, and then this one is going to be a purl. So our last stitch was a purl, so now we know that when we turn it around, that first stitch is going to be a knit. So I know you can't really see the pattern, so I'm going to go ahead and just do a few more rows, and it's the same exact thing, just doing it back and forth, or you're going to just be doing it interchangeably, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, and that's pretty much all there is to it. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a few more rows just so you can see this pattern a little bit more clearer. So after a few more rows, this is what you will see. Oh no, you are not getting away from me. And you'll see that it's really clear where the knit stitches are, and then we have the purls in between them. But this is just your average knit stitch, and feel free to go crazy with it. You don't have to do one by one. You can knit 2 stitches and then purl 2 stitches. You could knit 3 stitches and then purl 1 stitch. Like, honestly, I'm basic, and this is like the only one that I've tried, but the other ones look amazing. So definitely let me know how that goes for you guys. And this is going to be the last stitch that I show you guys, and now we are going to learn how to cast off. Casting off is just how you get your project off the needles and ready for you to wear. I'm going to be using the stockinette stitch that we used to cast off. And you can do this method with both purling, you can purl it, you can knit it. I'm pretty sure you can do it on the rib stitch as well, but it's pretty simple. We are going to start by knitting 2 stitches. So 1, 2. And then when you have 2 stitches on your right needle, you're going to want to put this stitch over the other one completely. So you're going to grab it with this needle. You could even use a crochet hook if that's easier for you, because I know this is kind of hard. And you're going to want to keep your needle on here by turning it. And you're going to pull that through. Just like that. So now we only have 1 stitch on here. But now we need to put a second one, so we're going to knit again. And now we have 2. So we're going to take this stitch and put it over that one, just like that. So you're just going to keep doing that all the way across. And yeah, it's like honestly kind of tedious. I would recommend like using a crochet hook. It's just so much easier. But also the more you practice, the easier it gets, right? So do whatever makes you happy. But this is just your average, your normal cast off. You can't go wrong with it. Okay, so I'm on the last 2, so let's just do those together. Last one. Okay, so now when you only have 1 on here, what you're going to do is I just make it bigger, and then I just use my fingers for this. I'll just do that, and then you can snip it right here, tighten it as much as you want, and then your piece is finished, and you have a beautiful casted off top. And that's how you finish any project that you want to finish. So that's pretty much everything that I wanted to share with you guys. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you found it helpful. I hope you are feeling a lot more comfortable with knitting. If you are more comfortable with knitting and you're able to finish your first project, feel free to send it over and show me on Instagram, because I love seeing your guys' creativity. You guys have way better ideas than me. I just show you guys how to do stuff, and then, you know, you guys go crazy and creative. And maybe in the future I can make like a knitting tutorial for you guys if you want. I don't know, it's crazy. Like, I kind of only used to see myself as a crocheter. I really never thought I would get into knitting because I loved crocheting so much. So it's really cool to be able to venture out and to be able to help you guys venture out. I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful. If it helped even one of you guys, that means that this whole entire video was worth it for me to make. So thank you guys so much for watching. Have a beautiful rest of your day, and bye you guys.